Om Shruti Smruti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Kritau Vande Bhagavantau Punah Punah Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Om Namah Pranavarthaya Shuddha Jnanaikamurtaye Nirmalaya Prashantaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
1.7 kilometers of Moore Street.
That which is the most sukshma, mahat, vishuddha, and nitya. We're trying to understand the reality of the vastu. So the Upanishad gives it certain descriptive terms to show it, all of which, as we've seen, is negation of not being this or not being that. So it is very difficult even to visualize. How do you visualize something which is ashabdam, asparsham, rupam, etc.? So our imagination literally boggles. And then on top of that, the next step is even more outside the ken of human capacity to think. And that vastu, which is all this shabdam, asparsham, avyayam, etc., is I. Do I make this connection? And to make this connection, I have to drop all previous notions I had about I. And yet I can't drop them. The I that I knew I was earlier continues. It has to interact with the Jagat. There has to be transaction. And for that, you need the Sharira, you need the Sukshma Sharira, you need the Ahankara. So you lose all this and yet you don't lose it. One of the many paradoxes that we come across. So one thing is to understand these words, Ashabdam, Asparsham, Avyayam, Anadi, Anantam, Ityadi. That itself is quite a challenge. And then to recognize myself in there. Bhashyakara tries to help us by taking these words And these are all interconnected words. What is Shabdam, Asparsham, Arupam, etc.? Has got to be something which is not an object. Any object will have one or more of these qualities. Something which is the absolute. So we saw some of what Bhashyakara has to say. Let's read that and then we'll continue from there. Ashabdam, Asparsham, Arupam,
Ashabdam
Shabdam
Asparsham
Asparsham
Arupam
Arupam
Arasam, Agandhavaccha,
Arasam
Rasam
Agandhavaccha
Yat Etad Vyakhyatam
Yat
Yat
Etad
Vyakyatam
Brahma Avyayam
Brahma
Brahma
Avyayam
Avyayam
Yadhi Shabdadimat
Yadhi
Yadhi
Shabdadimat
Shabdadimat
Tadvyeti.
Tadvyeti
Anything that is characterized by Shabda Ityadi, Vyeti, it gets wasted. It declines. Iyam tu,
Iyam
Idam
tu
tu
idam tu, idam tu,
Idam tu
Ashabdadimatvat,
Ashabdhadimatvat
Ashabdadimatvat
Avyayam,
Avyayam
Avyayam
Navyeti,
Navyeti
Navyeti
Nakshiyate.
Nakshiyate
Nakshiyate.
This, because it described it is as Ashabdam, Asparsham, Arupam, etc. This is therefore not subject to the changes that takes place in any property, any attribute. It is Avyayam. The Avyayam also is a word in the mantra. In fact, the way mantra is written, as the Ashabdam, Asparsham, Arupam, Avyayam, and then Arasam, Agandham, Ityadi. Because it is Ashabdam, Asparsham, Ityadi, it is Avyayam. It na vyeti. There is no destruction, there is no change, there is no decay, there is no wasting. Nakshiyate. Vyeti meaning nakshiyate. Then he connects to the next word, nityam. Ata evacha nityam.
Ata
Evacha
Nityam
Nityam.
etc. says therefore it's avyayam. And being avyayam, na vyeti, nakshiyate, therefore it is nityam. Look the connection. Ata evacha nityam.
Ata
Yadhi vyeti.
Nityam Yadhi Vyeti
Tadanityam.
Tadanityam.
Tadanityam
Anything which undergoes change. Anityam. Tat anityam. Tadanityam. Yadhi vyeti. Whichever is subject to destruction, subject to decay, subject to change, has to be anityam. He's stating the obvious, but he is re-emphasizing the same point that this is nityam. Because it is ashabdam, asparsham, etc. And therefore avyayam. And therefore nityam. Anything which is subject to change is anityam. Idam tu
Idam
Idam
tu
tu
navyeti
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 ataha nityam.
Ataha
Ataha
Nityam
Nityam
Saying the same thing again, just for emphasis. Anything that has possibility of change, of destruction, of decay, has to be anityam. It will not retain its sameness. I was going to say same form, but not just a form, it has no form. If it has form, it will change. Therefore, this is again something which is na vyeti ataha nityam. Therefore, it is nityam. So ashabdam, ashvasham, rupam, etc. Therefore, avyayam. Therefore, nityam. Itascha
Itascha
nityam. Now, what is nityam? He again takes words from the mantra. Itascha nityam.
इतश्च
Itascha
नित्यम्
nityam
Anadi.
अनादि
Anadi
Vidyamanaha adihi karanam yasya
अविद्यमान
tad idam anadi. Okay, read that because sentence makes sense. Avidyamanaha adihi
अविद्यमानः
Avidyamana
आदिः
Adihi
karanam asya tad idam anadi.
कारणम्
Karanam
अस्य
Asya
तदिदम्
Tadidam
अनादि
Anadi
Vidyamanaha adihi. For which there is no beginning. You can't pin a point on a time scale saying this is where it started. Avidyamanaha, it doesn't exist. Adi doesn't exist. Therefore, no karanam. Normally, when something has a beginning date, is because of something, some karanam. There is no karanam for this. This is, again, he connects it. That this is anadi because it has no karanam, no, therefore no adi. Anadi avidyamanaha adihi karanam asya tad idam anadi. That's how he defines anadi. And it's anantam. Yad yad adimat.
यद्
Before
यत्
that,
आदिमत्
anything which has an adi must be because of a karanam. And if it has a karanam, we have seen, it has to eventually resolve back into the karanam. Anything that we know, if it has a beginning, it must therefore have an end in the form of being resolving back into its karanam. In all this, we can think of this example we've been using all the time of an angavastram, fabric, yarn, fiber, ityadi. Each one can be thought of as the atma of the other. Fabric is the atma, if you want to use the word atma here, for every angavastram, every veshti, every handkerchief, because it comes from the fabric. It is fabric. And when it loses its shape as a product called angavastram, it is back to being a fabric. It is still fabric. Angavastram, after it has got, let us say, a couple of holes in it, you don't use it, you cut it up and use it as a wiping cloth. It is still cloth. And that for that fabric, the Atma is a yarn. And for that yarn, the Atma is the fiber, etc. You can keep going. But if you stop at this point, then the fiber is the Atma for everything. Fiber is the Atma for the yarn. It is the Atma for the fabric. It is Atma for all the products that come out of the fabric. And there are varieties of them. A number of different Angavastra, a number of different dhotis, number of different handkerchiefs, I'm deliberately taking unstitched cloth as an example. And they're all nothing but the fiber. Therefore, the fiber is the Atma of all of these products and the intermediaries. Really, there are no intermediaries in that sense. And our model says, from that Vastu came Akasha. Therefore, Vastu is the Karanam. But Vastu itself is not a Karanam for anything. How do we understand that? Therefore, we introduce an idea of a Maya, which to be negated later. And that Maya, Sahita, Brahman produces the karyam which we call akasha. Then the whole lot of processes. That akasha produces vayu. But akasha can't produce anything by itself. Goes back again. That Brahman, Maya Sahita Brahman produces vayu, and then on and on. Exactly like in our limited example of the fiber. Therefore, you can say that Brahman is the Atma for everything. Only till the point that you understand Mithyatvam. When you understand Mithyatvam, with that these things exist and yet don't exist. Sat asadbhyam anirvachaniyam. And at that point, we've understood Maya, and that Maya which we introduce for our understanding, which we negate. Therefore, there is nothing but that Brahman. Brahma Satyam, everything is Mithya. So when you pray, Hey Bhagavan, make me understand Satyam. Make me understand Atma, Anatma, Viveka. Make me understand that there is only one Satyam, one Atma. If I perceive anything else, it is only perception. Yadi Anatma Pashyami. Tad Mithya eva. Make me understand this. That, when it's clearly understood, all the Mithya can be taken off our calculation. Therefore, all Maya can be taken off our calculation. So it's anything which has an Adi, a beginning, and beginning means time. That must have a Karanam. And in time, in the same scale, at some point, it will resolve back into that Karanam. Yadyat Adimat
Yadyat Adimat
Adimat
Tat Karyatvat
Tatkaryatvat
Karyatvat
Anityam.
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 Because it is a Karyam, it has a Karanam, it is Anityam. It was born at a certain point in time, it will resolve back. Karane,
Karane
Karane
Praliyate.
Praliyate.
It will resolve back into the Karanam. For example, again, if you take every product like an Angavastram, will resolve back into its Karanam, which is the fabric, which will resolve back into its yarn, which will resolve back into its fiber. If it is a Karyam, and all of these are Karyam, they have to be Anityam. Yatha Prithivyadi.
Yatha
Yadyadi.
Takes us back to the Prithvi. Remember, Prithvi in the Sukshma Rupa, Tanmatra, is the last of the five. Akasha, Vayu, Agni, Apa, and Prithvi. Because it is a product, a karya of all of these four, it has all those four properties plus the additional property of Gandha. And anything which has more properties is less Sukshma, more perceptible. Anything which has less properties is less perceptible and therefore more Sukshma. We saw that, no? Yavad guna apachaya, as the gunas reduce, tavat Taratamyena saukshmyam drishtam. As the properties reduce, less and less properties, as you have a Prithvyadishu, Prithvi has all the properties. But if we go to Apa, it has only one less. If you go to Agni, it has one less. If you go to Vayu, it has one less. And if you go to Akasha, it has only one. Now you go back to the Atma, original Atma. No properties. Therefore, Avyayam. Therefore, Nityam. That Vastu, idam tu
Idam
Idam
tu
tu
sarvakaranatvat
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 karyam.
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 This Brahman, the Vastu we are trying to study, we are trying to understand. This, however, being the karanam for everything, akaryam. It is never a karyam. It is the karanam for everything. Like in our example, we keep going backward to fiber. I stopped at fiber, but you can keep going backwards. I don't know where it will stop, but it has to stop only at that one Vastu, because everything has become Mithya. And this Vastu can never be a karyam for something else. It is not a product. If it is a product, it will have a starting date. And therefore will have an ending date. Akaryatvat,
Karyatvat
Karyatvat
Nityam.
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 Because it is a karyam. It is not a product. It is not something which is produced. It is not something which is created. It is Nityam. So these words is reconnecting Avyayam, Nityam, Anadi, Anantam, and all this propertylessness. Ashabdam, Aspasham, Ityadi. Na tasya karanam asti
न तस्य
न tasya
कारणमस्ति
karanam asti
yasmin praliyate.
यस्मिन्
yasmin
प्रलीयते.
praliyate.
It has no karanam into which it can resolve back. It is not a karyam. There is no karanam. It is anadi. And therefore, there's nothing to resolve back into. It is the final karanam. Whatever expression, final karanam. There is nothing more after that. Therefore, tasya na tasya karanam asti yasmin into which it can resolve. Yasmin praliyate. It cannot resolve into anything. It is it. That's it. Therefore, it is anadi. It is also anantam. Tatha cha
Tatha
anantam.
anantam.
Because it has nowhere to end. It is the beginning. It is the end of everything. So, na with no ending. Tatha anantam. What is anantam? Like he defined anadi, he defines as avidyamanaha antaha
अविद्यमानः
Antah
karyam yasya tadanantam,
कार्यं यस्य
Karyamasya tadanantam.
for which there is no anta, doesn't exist, because there is no karanam to roll back into. Anantam is avidyamanaha antaha karyam yasya tad anantam. It is not a karyam. There is nothing to resolve back into it. There is no karanam for it. Therefore, it is anantam. This is important point. Brahman does not produce any karyam. Brahman cannot produce any karyam. anything that is produced, that we see, that we experience, is only iva, as though. Why do you say that? Because everything that we see as being produced is mithya, doesn't belong to the same order of reality. There is only one reality. Everything else is only as though. Because the very Maya, which we have introduced as an idea, it's mithya. And we negate that. This is the whole prakriya of the teaching. Brahman by itself can produce nothing. At best, we say that so many things are produced as though produced because of the presence of Brahman with Maya. We have to find all these expressions to explain this. Till we come to the point when we can negate Maya. No Maya. No Maya, therefore everything that follows from there is non-self-existent. No Akasha, no Vayu, no Agni, no nothing. And therefore everything that follows can be negated as mithya. I have to do that because otherwise somebody will get up to Swamiji, but those are there. I know, I can feel it, I can touch it. What you can touch and feel is only transactional, vyavaharika. Because you are transactional, the way that you talk about I touch, the toucher is also vyavaharika. The toucher exists because of which is what we are searching for. What makes the toucher touch? What makes the eyes see? What makes the ears hear? That Brahman, Atma, I is what we are searching for. Therefore, the whole Jagat that is produced, even if you argue that the whole Jagat is produced, even if you argue like that, then also Shastra says it is only as though. It makes no change in Brahman. We know many things in this Jagat which, when they produce something, become something else. They change. Sometimes they get destroyed. We've seen many examples like that. Here Bhashyakara takes one more example. Yatha
यथा
यथा
kadalvadehe
कदल्वादेः
aladi karya utpadanena
फलादिकार्योत्पादनेन
anityatvam
Api
अनित्यत्वं
दृष्टम्
दृष्टं
न च तथापि
न
न
च
च
तथापि
तथापि
अन्तवत्वं ब्रह्मणः
अन्तवत्वं
अन्तवत्वं ब्रह्मणः
ब्रह्मणः
यथा, as an example, if you take kadaliphalam, kadalvyadi is the tree. See, when these banana tree plantains, once they've given these fruits, that's it. Once the fruiting is done, they die. There is no more of the fruit available, no more of the tree available. It can grow again. In fact, that is why they say plantain is one of the most useful things. First it gives you the fruit. In fact, before it gives the fruit, it gives you also what is called flower. You make vegetables out of that also. Nice vegetable. In Tamil, it's called usli. Then the banana, of course, they are used all the time in the raw form, in the mature form, and then the leaves. Wonderful use. There are in Coimbatore, there are many people who don't use any ceramic or steel plates. They use only this. And therefore, there are shops that sell you this by, even if guests come, they eat on this. Guests come, they also give them the same banana leaves. And utterly hygienic. Finish eating, feed it to the cows. End of story. Recycled, cows are happy. No wastage. No problem of using soap for cleaning vessels, which you then throw into the environment. Beautiful. And then after it has done the fruiting, the stem of this banana, you remove the outer layer, inside you get some wonderful stuff with great medicinal properties. In Tamil Nadu, they use it extensively where in fact it's supposed to be extremely good for things like gallbladder stones and things like that, So you cut that, the tree might grow again, but the tree is destroyed. So, yatha kadalvadehe phaladikarya utpadanena, on production of the phala. What happens? Anityatvam drushtam. They die. The tree is finished. Anityatvam you can see in the Jagat. But Brahman is not like that. Nacha tathapi antavatvam brahmanaha. For the Brahman, there is no anta. Unlike the banana tree, there is no anta for that because there is no karya. Whatever karya you see is only mithya because it belongs to a different order of reality. In a banana tree, or what do you call it, plant or tree, whatever. The banana is also the same order of reality. Here it is not. There is only one Brahman and everything is as though. One single word takes care of everything. Iva. Therefore, nacha tathapi anantvatvam antavatvam brahmanaha. Of Brahman, there is no end. Explaining that anantam. Therefore, also it is called nityam. No end, no beginning, no karanam, nothing to resolve into. Therefore, nityam, no antam. There also nityam. Atopi nityam.
Atopi nityam.
Topi nityam.
If you remember the previous verse where we said how one thing resolved into another and that was another, eventually the buddhi resolves into the mahat, the samashti buddhi, hiranyagarbha. And that itself resolves into Brahman. Brahman being the sarva karanam. So he says, Mahataha,
Mahataha.
Mahattatvad,
Mahattatva.
Buddhyakhyatam,
Buddhyakhyat.
Buddhyakhyat,
Buddhyakhyat.
Buddhyakhyat.
Param,
Param.
Vilakshanam,
Vilakshanam.
Nitya
Vilakshanam.
Vigyapti
Vilakshanam.
Swarupatvat.
Nitya Vinyapti Swarupatvat.
Mahataha we seen is the samashti buddhi. Hiranyagarbha. Mahataha Mahattatvat, also called buddhi. Hiranyagarbha, samashti buddhi, mahattatvam. Param. Yeah, Param normally would mean superior, excellent, etc. Here, Bhashyakara explains that Vilakshanam. This is different from. So now when you look at understanding Ishvara, Maya Sahita Brahman, we say is Ishvara. That is how we talk about the fact that Ishvara has total control over Maya, he therefore is Mayavin, Mayavi, and therefore has total control over everything. Therefore, Sarvajna, Sarvashaktiman. This Mahat, Samashti Buddhi, Hiranyagarbha, even from that, this Brahman is Param, Vilakshanam. Why do you say that? Nitya Vyajnapti Swarupatvat. This is something we have been emphasizing again and again. Whatever is on a scale that we can understand, that we can measure. Like Jnanam has a scale from Jnanam at one end and Ajnanam at the other end. But both Jnanam and Ajnanam belong to the Jagat. How do they exist? What is the Karanam for the Jnanam? Nitya Nyapti. Tadnya Dhatuvartha. Now, we can see this, how instinctively we can make out that while the Jnanam is quantifiable, at whatever quantity level you take it, it is based on Nyapti. At all levels, it is Nyapti. Nya Dhatvartha. Because the Swarupa is that. Therefore, even Mahat is a Karyam of this Brahman. Mahataha Mahattatvat Buddhyakhyat Param Vilakshanam. From what? Nitya Vijnapti Swarupatvat. There's only one such Nitya Vastu. Everything has become Mithya. Sarvasakshi,
Sarvasakshi,
Sarvasakshi, Bhutatmatvat,
Sarvasakshi
Sarvabhutatmatvat,
Sarvabhutatmavat
this
Brahman.
Sarvabhutatmatvat, being the Atma of every Bhuta. Now you can take Bhuta as the Panchabhutas, the Sukshma form, the Panchabhuta of the Sthula form, or the Bhutas meaning beings. Whichever way you take, the Atma is only Brahman. None of them has an existence of its own. In our limited example, fiber became the Atma for everything. Every yarn, every fabric, every product from that fabric, fiber became the Atma. Like that, Sarvabhutatmatvat, Sarvabhutatmatvat, being the Atma of every Bhuta, and Sarvasakshi. Brahman does nothing, cannot do anything. See, this is the difficult portion to grasp. If Brahman does not do anything, how did the world come about? And that you cannot understand unless you understand the nature of this Jagat as Mithya. Once you grasp that, saying this is Mithya, then you can work backward, saying Mithya means that is not real. And yet not something which I can discard as being non-existent. It is something which has been as though created from something else. That something else from which it is as though being created is that Brahman. So it is a process of Adhyaropa. We are superimposing the entire Jagat and all its properties and characteristics and then negating everything. Being Sarva Bhuta Bhutatmatvat, Brahma is Sarva Sakshi. Just there. Everything else be create. And this is already said that earlier in one of the earlier verses, earlier mantras. Yesha sarveshu bhuteshu gudatmo na prakashate. Gudaha atma na prakashate. 2-3 verses, 2-3 mantras before this. Sarva bhuteshu. It is there it is the very source of existence of every bhuta. And being what it is not easy to grasp. Not graspable. Agrahyam. So he says, already been said, Uktam hi.
Uktam hi.
Esha sarveshu bhuteshu.
Esha sarveshu bhuteshu.
Ityadi.
Ityadi.
And then it takes a little time to explain this. There are many types of Nitya. This Brahman is absolute Nitya. But in the Jagat, we know there are many things which look Nitya because they have a very, very, very long time span. You know that we only know our time span, human years. But Shastra very clearly tells us that is only one measure. Every other loka has its own time measure. That's how you go on to bigger and bigger and bigger measure, eventually ending at kalpa. But all of them are within the time scale. That is why time looks absolute. Time is not. When you look at time from the perspective of Brahman, Paramarthika perspective, it is not absolute. Space is not absolute. But everything else is within this time-space continuum only. And we didn't, as human beings, realize it till very late. Only recently that this is relative has come out thanks to some extremely sharp brains that we had. So that Nityam is called Apekshika Nityam, like Swargaloka. One might spend one day in Swargaloka, but that one day might look like several years as far as we are concerned. That's why when somebody physically dies, he goes to some loka. We don't know how long he or she spends in that loka, but perhaps reappears in another form in this Jagat of ours, in this Prithvi of ours. After many years, perhaps. We don't know. But we know these timescales are not constant. Even on the earth, we know when you're standing in front of the milk which has been kept on the fire, you keep waiting, it doesn't boil. And then okay, I'll just go for a minute and come back, gone. It's all relative. There's an old song, it reminds me of Ik pal jaise ik jug beeta. You can interpret it both ways. One whole lifetime went away as one pal, one moment. But one moment felt like one whole lifetime. You can interpret it either way. These old lyricists of Hindi films, they were master kavis. They could really spin words. I don't see that much happening these days, but they could really spin words. Dhruvam cha,
Dhruvam cha,
Kutastham nityam,
Kutastham nityam,
na prithivyaadivat,
na
Na
prithivyaadivat,
apekshikam nityatvam.
apekshikam nityam.
Apekshika nityam is in the time scale, but very, very long time frames. Even the Prithvi disappears at the time of pralaya. That's a very long time. We know that. But it is still within the time frame, time scale. What we are talking about as nityam, absolute nityam, is the one which is the cause for time also. Therefore, not dependent on time. See the distinction between that. Apekshika nityam is a long time within the time scale. Kutastha nityam is the anvil on which you make the iron, red hot iron piece, you put and shape it the way you want to shape it. Blacksmithing. I know we have done that as part of our engineering studies workshop. Very tough. So hot the whole place is. You have to heat up this iron piece till it's red hot, put it on the anvil and bang, 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 bang. It never comes out the shape you want it to come out. We went through all that. Blacksmithing. We went through all the workshops and it was very funny. There's a fitting shop we went through. They'd give you let's say, for example, a 4.1 millimeter iron bar. And you're supposed to file it and reduce it to uniform 4 millimeters. And you go file, and then you go and measure it, it becomes 4.12 millimeters. I don't know how it happened. And then finally, after 3 hours of filing, we come at it looks like a bus stop. It never goes straight like that. It takes a lot of practice. So this workshop, blacksmithing workshop. The anvil is there. Anvil never changes shape. But what you put on that and bang with hammer, that can be changed to any shape you want. So this is called Kutastha, literally means anvil. So Kutastham nityam, like the anvil, which remains the same, doesn't change. The other things change on that. Prithviyadivat apekshikam nityam. Apekshikam nityatvam. Therefore, it looks like mountains, for example, look like they remain unchanged. Although we humans are quite capable of changing that. No? We go and do mining and all that. But even without our help, it is changing all the time. Mountains change, rivers change course. Over many years, maybe hundreds of years. Everything changes. Over long period, that is, apekshika nityam, relative nityatvam. There's also pravaha nityatvam, a constant flow. The best example we've been giving is the Ganga. Pravaha nityatvam, it is always there. But at any one point, they're not the same water. That water is flown, but it's still there. Constantly moving. Pravaha nityatvam. But here he says, unlike Prithvivyadi, this is Dhruvam. Like your Dhruva Nakshatra. You know, the Dhruva Nakshatra does not change position on the sky. So till we came up with all the GPS, etc., sailors used to use that to locate their position on the sea. Dhruva Nakshatra, pole star. Dhruvam cha kutastham nityam na prithivyadivat apekshikam nityatvam. Once we understand this satyam mithya, that which is the only absolute reality, everything else is on a time scale or a space scale. They are interrelated. However big, they only apekshika nityam. Once we grasp this, and we're able to contemplate upon the nature of Brahman, and to go to the next step and saying that Brahman has to be I, there is no choice. Aham Brahmasmi. That Brahman, Aham, the very nature of Asmat Pratyaya, it has to be that. Everything else, including my body, mind, sense complex, belong to Mithya Jagat. And yet, for the Jnani, and this is the little difficult translation, the Sharira continues to exist. He has to feed the Sharira, he has to rest the Sharira. Therefore, although the Jnani has understood that there is no individual I, the individual I forces itself upon, because the Jagat has to continue, interactions have to continue, therefore that is still there. And when you understand that as though, then you can understand how the Jnani responds to these things. Tadevam bhutam
Tadevam bhutam
bhutam
Brahmatmanam nichaya
brahmatmanam
brahmatmanam
nichaya
nichaya
avagamya
avagamya
tamatmanam
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 tad evam bhutam. This being so, what happens? Understood idea of Brahman, all these words, Prashabdam, Aspasham, Avyayam, Nityam, Anadi, Anantam, Ityadi, and come to the inevitable understanding, conclusion, that is Aham. Then what happens? This being so, tad evam bhutam, brahmatmanam nichaya. Nichaya, Bhashakara says, avagamya. Having understood without any doubt. Having understood this truth without any doubt, avagamya is what? Tam atmanam, as myself. When a person understands this truth of Brahman, Ashabdam, Aspasham, Arupam, Avyayam, Agandham, Nityam, anadi, anantam, ityadi, as I, as aham, then what happens? That phalam is mrityumukat,
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 mrityugocharat,
Mrityu
Mrityu-gocharat,
Gocharat,
Mrityugocharat,
avidya kama karma lakshanat,
Avidya
Avidya
Kama Karma
Kama
Kama
Karma
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 Lakshana,
Lakshana,
Lakshanat,
pramuchyate,
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 Vimuchyate,
vimudhyate.
Vimuchyate,
Vimuchyate.
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 Once it is clearly understood, nichaya. How do you nichaya? How do you understand this? Shrutva, matva, dhyatva, nididasitva, nischitya. Once it is absolutely clear, avagamya, as myself, then what happens? Mrityumukhat, literally from the jaws of death, mrityugocharat. Mrityu itself comes because there is this misconception of taking the Jagat as real. Therefore, my body, mind, sense complex as real. Avidya kama karma lakshanat. Because of avidya, the need to do, the desire from which is born karma, and from which comes karma phala. That is the cycle. Ajnanam leads to kama, wanting something. Why does it want something? What is the difference between a ajnani and a jnani? Jnani knows I am fullness itself. I am that Brahman. And more importantly, that Brahman is I. There's no need for him to do anything. There's nothing more you can gain, nothing, nowhere more you can go. But an ajnani weighs himself on the scale and says, I am wanting. I am limited. I can do so much more. All of which is true as far as the Jagat is concerned. Therefore, he wants to do something. To achieve certain karma, he needs to do karma. Kama karma lakshanat. And that karma produces. Karma phalam, that karma phalam has to be experienced, for which you need a sharira. Therefore, a new sharira is obtained. That karma phalam goes. Now you create more karma. Ajnanam continues. More kama, more karma phala, more sharira, more ajnanam continues. From that cycle, kama karma lakshanat, from that cycle, pramuchyate, he is freed. Yujyate, same thing. That is the phala. So with this, Upadesha is complete more or less. And the phala is also complete. And this is, remember, Yamadharmaraja as the teacher, teaching Nachiketa as a eager student, wanting to know the truth. And Yamadharmaraja gives him the complete picture. How you should go about doing it by resolving one each into the next, its karanam, that into its karanam, that into its karanam. Eventually arriving at the truth of the self as that which has no karanam, which is sarvasya karanam. For which no adi exists, avidyamanaha, viddhatu, with sattayam. for which no anta exists. That Brahman, which has no properties, no attributes, no nothing, and therefore does nothing, therefore does not change. It is partless, attributeless, and that it is partless, attributeless changes to I am partless, I am attributeless. That Brahman is I. This whole teaching is over. But I still have one full chapter to go. What is it going to talk about? We will see the next two mantras in the next class. After which we'll take one or two sessions only to address any specific thoughts, questions, doubts, comments. So if you have any such thing, please post it either in the group or to Anand. He will compile all of them and we'll address them after tomorrow's class. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari